When thinking about handheld games consoles, Nintendo is invariably the name that gets brought up. They've had near total control of the market for 30 years, the original Game Boy rocketing to success in 1990 and continuing today, with the Switch breaking sales milestone after sales milestone. Over the decades, other companies have thrown their hats into the ring, only to suffer a mauling by Nintendo. Most came and went with little fanfare, destined to become little more than footnotes in history. Sega mounted a decent challenge for a while with the Game Gear, and SNK's Neo Geo Pocket Color was undeniably pretty cool, if short-lived. Off of the back of their success with the PS1 and PS2, Sony decided to enter the handheld market and take on Nintendo once again, with what would become known as the PlayStation Portable, or PSP for short. The console was officially announced at E3 in 2003 by the father of PlayStation, Ken Kutaragi himself. No physical hardware was shown, however the general specs and feature set was announced. Kaz Hirai unveiled the console a year later in May of 2004 at a Sony press event. It teased graphics that were near to or on par with the PS2, a big promise to ship a handheld with similar graphical capabilities of what was at the time a current-gen home console. Technical specs were particularly impressive for a handheld of that time, in terms of hardware and its capabilities. It was a big step up from the Nintendo DS in every aspect. It featured a beautiful LCD screen in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which is rapidly becoming the video standard during this period. Early versions of the PSP showed off the general layout of the device. PlayStation's synonymous cross, square, triangle and circle made a return, 2 shoulder buttons along the top, and it featured a traditional D-pad on the left-hand side. It was noted that all the buttons were completely flat against the console and that no analog stick was present, which caused some early concerns. When the console was finally shown to the public, however, the buttons took on a more traditional approach and a single analog stick was present, putting it more in line with the typical approach taken by PlayStation controllers. Sony continued to innovate in physical mediums, producing the UMD, or Universal Media Disc format for the PSP. A mini-disc contained within a plastic shell designed to protect them from the brunt of any force from being inserted and removed from the console. Once again, offering an impressive level of storage for developers to use in order to make games with. UMDs have been up to 1.8GB, over 3 times that of the cartridges used by the Nintendo for the DS. Early on, a big push was made for the adoption of UMDs as a medium for entertainment. The PSP had full support for movie playback using MPEG-4, and a large selection of films and TV series were eventually ported to it and released on the PSP. Though by 2006, sales had started to slow down and UMD as a movie format was gradually phased out. And by 2009, Sony started a push towards digital distribution, almost phasing them out entirely. The proprietary nature of UMDs, combined with blank media or burners not being readily available, led them to only be used with the PSP. The PSP shipped with no internal storage, requiring owners to purchase a memory card separately. Sony's proprietary format, Memory Stick Pro Duo, was used for the storage of save games and media. It was used extensively by Sony throughout the 2000s, in digital cameras, camcorders, the Walkman series of music players, and was even supported in certain TVs and laptops. It was eventually supplanted by the SD card format and dropped by Sony though, due to it being generally cheaper and having been adopted by a much wider variety of devices and companies. The PSP shipped with an internal battery, similar to the DS with a respectable but not outstanding 47 hours of runtime on a single charge. Somewhat lower than the average battery life of the DS, but given the hardware it was powering, it was pretty impressive. Taking less than 2 hours to charge from flat meant that gamers didn't have to wait long to jump back into things either. A degree of backwards compatibility was included. Original PS1 games fairly obviously wouldn't be compatible due to the console's size and it not using traditional discs. However, digital copies of PS1 games started to be sold on the PlayStation Store, and these would be fully compatible with the PSP, bringing a huge library of classic games to the handheld and boosting the amount of software available. While this wasn't backwards compatibility in the truest sense, it was a welcome addition nonetheless. Over the course of the PSP's life, a total of 5 different revisions to the hardware were released. The initial launch model, the PSP 1000, 2 subsequent models in the PSP 2000 and 3000 respectively. These revisions were all based off the initial design of the 1000. 2000, or PSP Slim, was a third lighter than the original and around 20% slimmer. Improvements to the battery life and screen were made, upping the average runtime to around 8 to 10 hours. Performance was improved upon, with the system RAM being doubled from 32MB to 64MB, giving faster loading times and generally improving the web browser. A video out port was added, allowing players to connect their PSP to the TV for use in the home. The 3000 made further improvements to the screen, with an increased colour range, lower pixel response times and a better contrast ratio. An anti-glare coating was also added to the screen to make playing games while outside easier. Unfortunately, upon the release of the 3000 model, a problem with the graphics in motion was realised, with a visible interlacing effect. Sony acknowledged the issue and later stated they were unable to fix it, and as such the problem would remain. Attitudes towards the interlacing are mixed. Owners upgrading from a 1000 or 2000 model typically considered it to be a deal breaker. However, discourse around the issue seemed to suggest that if it was your first time with the console, then it wouldn't be much of a problem. I personally have only ever owned a launch model, so I can't really comment on whether it would bother me or not, but if you're looking into grabbing a PSP, it's worth looking into the issue to see if it's going to change the experience for you. In 2009, a fourth model was released, called the PSP N1000 or the PSP Go. Completely redesigned, the PSP Go sported a sliding screen chassis, revealing the system controls that were otherwise hidden from view. Benefiting from further improvements to size and weight, the PSP Go is nearly half the weight of the original launch model and less than half the size. This came with some downsides, however. The battery was no longer removable, meaning replacement was no longer feasibly possible by the average user, something previous models had enjoyed. No UMD drive was included, making the PSP Go a digital-only console. This made it a tough sell for people wanting to potentially upgrade to a new model or already had a physical game collection. All previous models came with no onboard storage included, owners having to purchase memory cards in order to download games and save their progress. To make up for the lack of any UMDs to store games on, 16GB of internal memory was included in the Go. Due to the slow uptake of the Go and the impending release of the PSP's successor, the Vita, the Go was relatively short-lived, being discontinued less than 2 years after its launch. The final PSP model to be released was the E1000 in October of 2011. This was known as the PSP Street. Sony marketed the Street as a budget PSP model that was released exclusively in the PAL territories for a relatively cheap €99. Several features and functionality were cut to the model to facilitate the lower price tag. Wi-Fi was completely removed, thus necessitating the UMD drive make a return, and the move to a mono speaker over all the previous revision stereo speaker was made, along with the removal of the console's microphone. The PlayStation Portable released in Japan on December 12, 2004, and the rest of the world in March of the following year. It launched with a steep $250 price tag, almost double that of its main competitor, the DS. This didn't stop it from having a successful launch, however, with reportedly 500,000 units being sold in its opening weekend in the US and selling out completely in the UK in 3 hours. The PSP line of consoles went on to sell around 80 million units worldwide across its 10-year lifespan. It was received generally positively by critics and gamers alike. Some concerns were raised by the initial high price, but most saw it as a necessary downside to having what was at the time the most powerful portable gaming console available. Critical response to the later revisions was more mixed. Specifically the PSP Go, it was priced quite high on its initial release with the same $250 price tag as the base model from several years before, with some noting that it was only $50 less than a PS3 at the time. The controls also received some criticism. Due to the console's vast redesign to facilitate the sliding screen design, elements such as the analog stick were placed in what was often seen as a suboptimal position. The PSP enjoyed a long life. While models started to be discontinued in 2011, it wasn't officially ended until 2014, with upgraded models being released through the majority of its life. With Sony's entrance into the handheld market, Nintendo, for the first time in a long time, finally had a competitor. It wasn't quite as impressive or industry-defining as when they jumped into the home console space with the original PlayStation, but it proved there was room for more than just Nintendo, raising the bar for what could be achieved with such small, undoubtedly limited hardware. The DS eventually sold nearly double the units that the PSP did, but it was an impressive undertaking nonetheless. The PSP continues to be a fantastic console even today, the vast, incredibly versatile lineup of games, covering a wide spectrum of genres. A lot of these games remain playable, with Sony's follow-up console, the Vita, being completely backwards compatible with all the digital titles of the PSP. PSPs can be picked up fairly cheaply on eBay these days, and the games haven't quite hit the point of being overly expensive yet. So if you're a PlayStation fan and somehow haven't managed to try a PSP yet, I fully recommend picking one up and giving them a go. Thank you for watching. If you've managed to get this far into the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. The next video in this series was always planned to be about the Vita, but unfortunately at the moment I have no real means of recording Vita footage until I get my hands on a PlayStation TV, which aren't exactly cheap right now. If anyone can recommend a way of capturing Vita gameplay in the meantime, please let me know down in the comments.